Alright, guys, welcome to the homework stream, day 3. Pretty sick. Today we got a little thing, it's different, and it's pretty cool. But it should be pretty fun. From the textbook, all we have to read is page 44 to 46, along with Federalist Papers 10 and 51, and Brutus 1. Brutus 1, just gonna read straight. Federalist Papers 10 and 51 are worded really weird, so I'm just gonna have to find a translated version of that. Anyway, the book, 2016 Presidential Election Edition, AP Edition, Government in America, People, Politics, and Policy. Page 44, Ratifying the Constitution. The Constitution did not go into effect once the Constitutional Convention was over. The states first had to ratify it. There is no way of determining precisely the public's feelings about the new document, but as John Marshall, who later became Chief Justice, suggested, it is scarcely to be doubted that in some of the adopting states a majority of the people were in opposition. Emphasis added. The Constitution itself required that only 9 of the 13 states approve the document before it could be implemented. Thus, the framers eased the path to ratification by ignoring the requirement that the Articles of Confederation be amended by only a unanimous consent. Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Throughout the states, a fierce battle erupted between the Federalists, who supported the Constitution, and the Anti-Federalists, who opposed it. Newspapers were filled with letters and articles, many written under pseudonyms, praising or condemning the document. In praise of the Constitution, 3 men, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay, wrote a series of 85 essays under the name Publius. These essays, known as the Federalist Papers, are second only to the Constitution itself and reflecting the thinking of the framers. On October 27, 1787, barely a month after the convention ended, the first of the 85 Federalist Papers appeared in New York newspapers as part of the ratification debate in New York. They not only defended the Constitution detail by detail, but also represented an important statement of political philosophy. The essays influenced few of the New York delegates, however, who voted to ratify the Constitution only after New York City threatened to secede from the state if they did not. Far from being unpatriotic or un-American, the Anti-Federalists sincerely believed that the new government was an enemy of freedom, the very freedom they had just fought a war to ensure. They launched a bitter, biting, even brilliant attacks on the work of delegates such as Washington, Madison, Franklin, and Hamilton, and frankly questioned the motives of the Constitution's authors. This song is kind of fresh. One objection was that the new Constitution was a class-based document, intended to ensure that the economic elite controlled the public policies of the national government. Another fear of the Anti-Federalists was that the new government would erode fundamental liberties. Why, they asked, was there no list of rights in the Constitution? You can compare the views of the Federalists and Anti-Federalists in Table 2.5 on page 45. I'm not going to read the table. To allay fears that the Constitution would restrict personal freedoms, the Federalists promised to add amendments to the document specifically protecting individual liberties. They kept their word. James Madison introduced 12 constitutional amendments during the first Congress in 1789. 10 were ratified by the states and took effect in 1791. These first 10 amendments to the Constitution, which restrained the national government from limiting personal freedoms, have come to be known as the Bill of Rights. Another of Madison's original 12 amendments was dealing with congressional salaries, which was ratified 201 years later as the 27th Amendment. Opponents also feared that the Constitution would weaken the power of the states, which it did. Patrick Henry railed against strengthening the federal government as an expense of the states. "We are come hither," he told his fellow delegates to the Virginia Ratifying Convention, "to preserve the Commonwealth of Virginia." Many state political leaders feared that the Constitution would diminish their own power as well. Finally, not everyone supported the new government's economic powers. Creditors opposed the power to issue paper money because it might produce inflation and make the money they received as payment on their loans decline in value. Debtors favored paper money, however. Their debts, such as the mortgages on farms, would remain constant, but if money became more plentiful, it would be easier for them to pay off their debts. Ratification. Federalists may not have had the support of the majority, but they made up for it in shrewd politicking. They knew that many members of the legislatures of some states were skeptical of the Constitution and that state legislatures were filled with political leaders who would lose power under the Constitution. Thus, the Federalists specified that the Constitution be ratified by special conventions in each state, not by state legislatures. Delaware was the first to approve. On December 7, 1787, only 6 months passed before New Hampshire's approval, which was the 9th, that made the Constitution official. Virginia and New York then voted to join the Union. 2 states were holdouts, North Carolina and Rhode Island. They made the promise of the Bill of Rights. Wait, I read that wrong. North Carolina and Rhode Island made the promise of the Bill of Rights their price for joining the other states. Sorry, lost my place. With the Constitution ratified, it was time to select office holders. The framers of the Constitution assumed that George Washington would be elected the first president of the new government, even giving him the convention's papers for safekeeping, and they were right. The general was the unanimous choice of the Electoral College. He took office on April 30th, 1789, in New York City, the first national capital. New Englander John Adams became the vice president, or as Franklin called him, his superfluous excellence. That's like something Mr. Peppers would say. Alright, well, there's that. I'm going to get to the Federalist Papers in a second. I'll be right back. All right, so I'm gonna give my best try to read as much of the Federalist, as much of Federalist 10 as I can, um, before I straight up just can't comprehend what I'm even reading. So we'll try my best. See if I can't do a James Madison voice, whatever he sounded like. Among the numerous advantages proposed by a well-constructed union, none deserve to be more accurately developed than its tendency to break and control the violence of faction. The friend of popular governments never finds himself so much alarmed for their character and fate as when he contemplates their propensity to this dangerous vice. He will not fail, therefore, to set a due value on any plans which, without violating the principles to which he is attached, provides a proper cure for it. The instability, injustice, and confusion introduced in the public councils have in truth been a mortal disease under which popular governments have everywhere perished, as they continue to their favourites and fruitful topics from which the adversaries to liberty derive their most spacious declamations. The valuable improvements made by the American constitutions on the popular models, both ancient and modern, cannot certainly be too much admired, but it would be unwarrantable partiality to contend that they haven't effectually obviated the danger on this side as was wished and expected. Complaints are everywhere heard from our most considerate and virtuous citizens, equally the friends of public and private faith. Alright, I give up. I tried it in every accent and it didn't make any sense. It's Federalist 10, Lamar. Alright. I guess I'll find a summary for it real quick. Oh, my computer just crashed. Sort of. It's fine. My web browser crashed was what the problem was. I shall be hopefully returning. Oh no, yep, all of my applications are frozen except Spotify, so that's good. Just gonna assume I'm still talking, so I shall be right back. And we are back, I think. My, whatever, the software I use for live streaming says, well, nothing. It's pretty much crashed, but when I go to YouTube, I am still streaming, so I assume you can hear me. I'm going to unmute this. Actually, I shall be right back. All right, cool. Looks like it is working, I think. Good question. Let me check something, actually. Yep, we're good. All right, sick. Now that we're back doing stuff, I'm going to read basically a summary of Federalist number 10. Federalist 10 contains 23 paragraphs, and this is basically a summary of each of those paragraphs. The violence of faction is the mortal disease of popular governments. The public assemblies have been infected with the vice of majority tyranny. Measures are too often decided not according to the rules of justice and the rights of the minor party, but by the superior force of an interested and overbearing majority. What is a faction? Faction is a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or a minority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest, adverse to the rights of other citizens, or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. Aggregate. How can we cure mischiefs of faction? We can either cure it by 1. Removing its causes, or 2. Controlling its effects. There are 2 methods of removing the causes of faction. 1. Destroy the liberty essential to its existence, or 2. Give to every citizen the same opinions, the same passions, and the same interests. 1 is a remedy that is worse than disease because it is unwise and entails the abolition of liberty, which is essential to political life. And 2 is impractical. Opinions, passions, and interests are unlikely to be in harmony. The diversity in the faculties of men from which the rights of property originate is not less an insuperable obstacle to an uniformity of interests. The protection of these faculties is the first object of government, and that leads to the division of society. And basically, he's saying you're not going to get everyone thinking the same. Further considerations of the second point is the latent causes of faction are thus sown into the nature of man. Thus are many sources of the factions, but the most common and durable source of factions has been the various and unequal distribution of property. The regulation of these various and interfering interests that grow up of necessity in civilized nations and form the principal task of modern legislation and forms the spirit of party and faction in the necessary and ordinary operations of government. Wow. Basically, yeah, that's saying that, once again, okay, he has a lot of further considerations that not all of us are the same for a lot of reasons. Wow, he has multiple. The next 4 paragraphs are about how we're not all equal. Okay, great. Thanks, Madison. The interference we brought in, cause of faction cannot be removed, and that relief is only sought in the means of controlling its effects. So now he's saying the only way to control the effects of what was this? Right, so the only way to remove the causes of a faction are either to destroy liberty or have everyone think the same. The first one doesn't make sense for good government, and the second one is impossible. And so he says that the only way is to control its effects. So, controlling its effects, the Republican principle of majority rule is the solution to minority faction. But what if we have majority faction? To secure the public good and private rights against the danger of such a faction, and at the same time to preserve the spirit and form of popular government, is then the great desideratum, sure, by which this form of government can be rescued by opprobrium, he's making up words, under which it is which it has been labored and be recommended to the esteem and adoption of mankind. The introduction of the solutions to majority faction, basically to solve majority faction, either A, existence of the same passion or interest in a majority at the same time must be prevented, or B, the majority having such coexistent passion or interest must be rendered by their number and local situation unable to concert and carry into effect schemes of oppression. Introduction of the form of government to implement the solution Madison declares. Pure democracy works against solutions. A and B, republic is good, blah, blah, blah. 2 great points. Difference is to refine the better government, probably a fit. Y'all are just gonna have to read it yourself. The Constitution forms a happy combination. Alright, the Federalist Papers are like why it's good. In the extent and proper structure of the Union, therefore, we behold a Republican remedy for the diseases most incident to Republican government. You heard it there first. Well, I don't know about first, but you get it. Now for Federalist 51. Alright, I got a summary of Federalist 51 here. James Madison begins his famous Federalist paper by explaining that the purpose of this essay is to help... Actually, oh, right, I can't change. Okay, just ignore that it says Federalist 10. This is actually Federalist 51. Alright, now where was I reading from? James Madison begins his famous Federalist paper by explaining that the purpose of this essay is to help the readers understand how the structure of the proposed government makes liberty possible. Each branch should be, in Madison's opinion, mostly independent. To assure such independence, no one branch should have too much power in selecting members of the other 2 branches. If this principle were strictly followed, it would mean that the citizens should select the president, the legislators, and the judges. But the framers recognize certain practical difficulties in making every office elective. In particular, the judicial branch would suffer because the average person is not aware of the qualifications judges should possess. Judges should have great ability, but also free of political pressure. Since federal judges are appointed for their life, their thinking will not be influenced by the president who appoints them, nor the senators whose consent the president will seek. The members of each branch should not be too dependent on the members of the other 2 branches in determination of their salaries. The best security against the gradual concentration of power in any one branch is to provide constitutional safeguards that would make such concentration difficult. That's some kind of big words. The constitutional rights of all must check one man's personal interests and ambitions. We may not like to admit that men abuse power, but the very need for government itself proves they do. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. Unfortunately, all men are imperfect, the rulers and the ruled. Consequently, the great problem in framing a government is that the government must be able to control the people, but equally important, must be forced to control itself. The dependence of the government on the will of the people is undoubtedly the best control, but experience teaches that other controls are necessary. Dividing power helps to check its growth in any one direction, but power cannot be divided absolutely equally. In the Republican form of government, the legislative branch tends to be the most powerful. That is why the framers divided the Congress into 2 branches, the House of Representatives and the Senate, and provided for a different method of election in each branch. Further safeguards against the legislative tyranny may be necessary. In a representative democracy, it is not only important to guard against the oppression of rulers, it is equally important to guard against the injustice which may be inflicted by certain citizens or groups. Majorities often threaten the rights of minorities. There are only 2 methods of avoiding evil. First is to construct a powerful government, a community will, such as will is larger than and independent of the simple majority. This solution is dangerous because such a government might throw its power behind a group in society working against the public good. In our country, The authority to govern comes from the entire society. In addition, under the Constitution, society is divided into many groups of people who hold different views and have different interests. This makes it very difficult for one group to dominate or threaten the minority groups. Justice is the purpose of government and civil society. If governments allow to encourage strong groups to combine together against the weak, liberty will be lost and anarchy will result. And the condition of anarchy tempts even strong individuals and groups to submit to any form of government, no matter how bad, which they hope will protect them as well as the weak. Madison concludes that self-government flourishes in a large country containing many different groups. Some countries are too large for self-government, but the proposed plan modifies the federal principle enough to make self-government both possible and practical in the United States. That's Federalist 51. Federalist 51. Brutus 1 it is. Okay, Brutus was the pen name of an anti-federalist in a series of essays designed to encourage New Yorkers to reject the proposed constitution. Alright, so Brutus 1, you got your, Brutus 1 was an anti-federalist paper. Wow, this thing is big. Okay. Let's see if I can't find a summary of it. The main objection against the Constitution by the Anti-Federalists, and as articulated through Brutus I, was the dissolution of the sovereignty of the states to form one great republic. Hold on, let me... According to Brutus, a preferred arrangement would be one where the 13 confederated republics... Is it good enough to read? The first question that presents itself on the subject is whether a confederated government be the best for the United States or not. Or in other words, whether the 13 United States should be reduced to one great republic governed by one legislator or under the direction of one executive and judicial, or whether they should continue 13 confederated republics under the direction and control of a supreme federal head for certain defined national purposes only. This government is to possess absolute and uncontrollable power, legislative, executive, and judicial, with respect to every object to which it extends. For by the last clause of Section 8, Article 1st, it is declared that the Congress shall have the power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by the Constitution in the government of the United States, or in any department of office thereof. And by the 6th article, it is declared that this Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and the treaties made, or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or law of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. It appears from these articles that there is no need for any intervention of the state governments between the Congress and the people to execute any one power vested in the general government, and that the Constitution and laws of every state are nullified and declared void, so far as they are or shall be inconsistent with this Constitution, or the laws made in pursuance of it, or with the treaties made under the authority of the United States. The government then, so far as it extends, is a complete one, and not a confederation. Madison demonstrates that the proposed constitution creates a central government that will make the state's government obsolete. Further, whatever residual powers the states would have, they would still be under the subject of the central government. He then proceeds to discuss the issue of representation within the context of the U.S. Constitution. Madison states, if respect is to be paid to the opinion of the greatest and wisest men who have ever thought or wrote on the science of government, we shall be constrained to conclude that a free republic cannot succeed over a country of such immense extent, containing such a number of inhabitants that these increasing in such rapid progression as that of the whole United States. Among the many illustrious authorities which might be produced to this point, I shall content myself with quoting only two. The one is Baron de Montesquieu, The Spirit of Laws, chapter, it's in Roman numerals 16, volume 1, book 8. It is natural to a republic to have only a small territory. Otherwise, it cannot long subsist. In a large republic, there are men of large fortunes and consequently of less moderation. I'm not going to read the whole Montesquieu quote. History furnishes no example of a free republic. That's another quote. Brutus argues that the proposed constitution is incompatible to the U.S. because of the size of the country and the number of inhabitants. He also notes that the U.S. is rapidly growing and is set to increase over 10 times its current size in the next several years. He then relies on the works of Montesquieu and Beccaria, who argue then that a large republic often creates tyrannical leaders. He goes further to state, the territory of the United States is of vast extent. It now contains near 3 million of souls, and is capable of containing much more than 10 times that number. Is it practical for a country so large and so numerous, as they will soon become, to elect a representation that will speak their sentiments, without their becoming so numerous as to be incapable of translating public business? It certainly is not. It is evident that Brutus consider a republic as a representative democracy. He then argues that it is not possible to have an accurate representation of the people in such a large society, and to the extent that it is possible, then it would require an increased number of people to represent the community, making it a pluralist democracy. In his view, pluralists only work in homogeneous societies, as he notes. In a republic, the manners, sentiments, and interests of the people should be similar. If this not be the case, then there will be a constant clashing of opinions, and the representatives of one part will be continually striving against those of the other. This will retard the operations of governments and prevent such conclusions as will promote the public good. He goes on to say that in so extensive a republic, the great officers of government would soon become above the control of the people and abuse their power to the purpose of aggrandizing themselves and oppressing them, meaning that such a society would require a small number of people to lead the rest, creating an elite leadership beyond the control of the people, making it difficult, if not impossible, to hold the leaders to an account. So basically, Brutus 1 says that America too big, so we're going to get tyrannical leaders anyway if we have a republic. Federalist 10 and 51 said that republic's great because no tyrannical, give people choice, blah blah blah. And let's see, what's the other one say? In the textbook basically said that those papers exist. But yeah, Federalist 10 and 51 basically said that we have to get rid of factions, and so the best way to control those factions is, and pretty much according to James Madison, the only way to control those factions is to create is to basically have a strong republic, and therefore that's why he wrote Federalist 10 and 51, and Brutus says nah, because we're too big, and according to these old philosophers, it's not going to work. Well, spoiler alert, it kind of did, so whatever. Cool. Anyway, I'm not sure if my stream, my thing that helps me stream is not responding, so I have no idea how to actually end this stream. I'm not entirely sure how it's even still running. It's a great question. My whole Windows isn't really working that well right now, so that's great as well. Yeah,